Sup everybody, this is Karak with ACG, and as always it's my continuing open world adventure to bring you reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. And here we are. It is time to check out a game that's one part kicking the shit out of a paint store and one part post-apocalyptic power fantasy. That's right, the Neon Apocalypse has arrived. Rage 2 from id Software and Avalanche Studios. Rage 2 returns to the land that Drab Colors forgot decades after the original. It's a first-person open-world shooter. It's out May 14th for the Xbox, the PC, and the PS4. Let's see if Rage 2 is the perfect prodigy, split off from the best parts of Mad Max and id shooter history, or if it's just the freakish, crisper, DNA-mutated love child of ideas slapped together during a midnight rendezvous. As always, if you like the video, go out there and find a smaller YouTube that you watch and maybe you haven't hit the subscribe button for, and hit it. YouTube is a crazy place right now. It's hard to get a foothold. Now, somebody that I like, and I'm going to talk about right now, is Happy Console Gamer. He's an amazing reviewer. He's very passionate about video games, and when I'm done watching a video from him, I always know exactly what it was that he liked or didn't like and what I'm gonna align with. Seriously, I would say check him out. So anyway, here's my review for Rage 2. What happens when Instagram filters die, Crocs are evil, even in the future, and the continuous adventures of the new Walker, Texas Rager. Graphics are up first. When you're battling a convo across the ruined remnants of some barely paved road, fighting for your life and trying to beat the living crap out of 12 other vehicles, the game really does harken back to the best that Mad Max offered us from those folks. The explosions, the kinetic feel, the debris flying, and the sense of collision and impacts of weapons is really profound, and it's a joy to drive around in the game and take on the other survivors of the apocalypse. And yes, here you have to ignore for a second that you're basically supposed to be a good guy, but it doesn't take long before you're bird of prey in some trusty of modern chemicals who's blasted down a deserted road that wasn't exactly deserted, and you hightail it after him. The game's use of color work also is something that I think people should notice. The neon pinks, the lime greens, and enough wayward bright primaries to really make you think that they fell headlong into a Bob Ross DMT painting. With you rampaging through radiated jungles 1 second, blasting off multicolored plateaus the next, and then battling your way up the neon-soaked towers of some gang lord who apparently ripped off every tavern store and neon light that they could find in a 40-mile radius. When it comes to the game world and its overall design, I have absolutely no complaints. Also, I like the gun design here. They aren't overly detailed or dramatic, but most have a nice secondary feature, and they fit the more robust build to the look of the Rage world, or the more futuristic ARC-style techs of some of them, depending on the heritage of the gun. Some of their shots look really good, like the delayed takeoff of the rocket launcher's secondary fire, or the air pressure disturbance of the shotgun zoomed-in mode. I really like those. Small graphical details, but I think they add to the package. Characters themselves ragdoll when hit, and impacts look good with exploding bits of armor when you break it, and that does a passable job informing the gamer of damage done during a shot. I also really have to say I like the explosions in the game. Now, when it comes to the characters themselves, there are some oddities. First, the game does not set its best foot forward when you start out. It's easily the most drab and downright terrible looking place in the entire game. And not just artistically, nothing more than a series of concrete halls and a floor and some NPCs standing around in a burned out building. That low resolution texture shows up on their faces, the lack of detail that many other games seem to offer right now. Now, that being said, once you leave the location, most world areas look excellent, and there are a number of main NPCs that look tremendous. What's just a little bit questionable here is with the low NPC count in the world, the cities, the towns, and the bandit camps, it can actually make the game look a little bit wanting when it comes to those extras. Some characters move around the town, and overall there's a good lived-in feeling to most of those locations. But you might question this. Is it because of the performance they want to get out of the game engine? Performance is also a mixed bag. First, let's get this out of the way. Most of the time was spent with the PC version with the 3 sets of drivers from prior releases, as well as the specific Rage 2 Day 1 drivers. On a 2080 Ti with a current i7 at 4.8 and 32 gigs of RAM, I was actually unable to hit 60 FPS at 4K reliably. It wasn't dropping far below that, but it was hitting mid-50s most of the time. The game has a couple settings. One of them is an auto-scaling setting to keep frame rate closer to what you want, dynamically adjusting the resolution. But it was actually never very aggressive, and by the time it was working, I had already passed the locations of FPS drops, and I tested that later in those same spots. It feels a little bit like it needs to be more aggressive. Also, there's a good deal of pop-in, and this was tested both on an SSD as well as M2 memory. And while the M2 install did seem to be a bit less when it comes to some of the pop-up, many of the elements of debris in the game world popped in regardless of how fast I was going, running, or even flying around. Lastly, the game has a number of issues with its weather and fog systems, with random flickering at times and some lighting issues dropping into your vision as you're driving. It's not all the time, not at all, but it is noticeable. The consoles actually fare far worse. 1080p resolution on the Pro and the X as they attempted to hit 60 FPS as their cap, but they do not keep a steady 60 and instead vacillate down to the low 50s and probably lower. On the normal PS4, the resolution sticks to 1080p, but the FPS drops all the way to a 30 cap, and on the original Xbox, that resolution drops further to 900p. This offers very blurry visuals throughout due to how the image is processed, so if you're on the console, beware of that. The issue here is that those machines are ancient now, creaking under the weight of designs that really aren't made for a lot of today's games, and especially with a lighting engine like this. So if you're jumping into Rage 2, you have to understand that. And if you like HDR, well, I hope you like it in another game, because this is a game that literally looks like it's straining to deliver all the colors at once, and it is surprisingly omitted. It's really disappointing. Does all this make for an ugly game? At times, honestly, yes it does. And at other times, the game's excellent lighting engine, when it's working, phenomenal color work overall, and action paint a more professional picture than the different parts. And that brings us to sound, music, and voice.
Heinlein cut ties with us. I'm more than willing to reboot the project, but as you can see, I have more pressing matters.
I can see that. Who are these guys?
Hired thugs. The Goon Squad. Small-time bandit outfit.
Who sent them?
Only one scumbag with balls enough.
And I think this time we'll do music first. I actually like this. It's not the epic thrashing of Mick Gordon's soundtrack in Doom, so don't expect that. So many people fell in love with that, but this is more of a mix of industrial tunes, guitar leads during battles, and more ambient fare during that exploratory gameplay. I like those. I think they really did a great job building the atmosphere. The issue here is that the audio cues are many times off, alerting me to enemies far before I saw them, or flashing in with heavy layered tracks and then flashing back out again. Many battles seemed a little bit oddly timed as the music fought for prominence with the sound effects. Turning the music down a couple notches did work, but due to the timing issues, some of the battle moments were not elevated by the music like they could have been. Instead, they were either a little bit shortchanged or even short-circuited with a lack of surprise. As a package, I really did like the music. I just wish that they were a little bit more finessed. And that brings us to sound. While it doesn't have the most settings, surround, stereo headphones, as well as overall dynamic range, it does well with what it has, offering some really good 3D spatial cues during battle, and each weapon sounds good for what it's doing, with the handgun packing a bit more punch than I expected, and the shotgun having a nice, raspy sound to it. Also, your cybernetic powers have some excellent low-end thrum to them that makes them feel incredibly powerful. There was one issue here, and only one, and that's that the audio for distance explosions is a bit hit and miss, sometimes playing, sometimes not. Even if it's very close to you, it's something that ends up just happening in the game and then sort of corrects itself. And last up in this trilogy of audio is going to be voice. Let's get this right out in the open. I don't mind the side characters at all, and I know some people are going to hate them. They have the friggin' subtlety of someone stabbing you with a fork to indicate they're hungry, many times leaning closely to just downright 13-year-olds telling dirty jokes at recess. But that was actually fine with me. The game is always hinged on that oddity in the original title, and some of the buffoonery you see actually fits the atmosphere of the game world just fine. That does bring us to the main voice actors, though, and I don't find it very well done. You're able to pick either a male or female character when you start, but neither's very convincing, shambling through their lines like a State of Decay extra, versus someone in a game world where people are rivet bolting freezer doors of their cars just so they can look at you and say, "Doesn't that look cool?" When it comes down to it, I think a silent protagonist would have worked better here, especially since the story's overall content is so weird and out there. It's very hard to know what tone to set. One second you're ripping a dude's head off, and the next second pretending to care about some guy's best friend who was missing 6 months ago, and he's just now checking in on him. Luckily, you don't talk a ton, and like I said, I really did like the side actors. I think they were fine. Also, a lot of times when you're in battle, the different NPCs will talk, and the AI will sort of give each other a heads up of where you are. So I like that. And of course, that brings us to gameplay. And a bit about the story. General Cross, leader of the Authority, is pissed because people in the lands didn't accept his help, so he basically decides to just kill them all, which is the equivalent of a neighbor offering you their lawnmower, you refuse, so they come over and machete your entire family, but whatever. You play as Walker, an orphan who basically steals the gear from a fallen ranger during one of the attacks, and then everyone just accepts that you're a ranger from that point on. Yeah, the story is not much, and in fact, it wobbles and bobbles all the way through its length, never really getting too far off the ground. To get through it, you have to perform missions for 3 various leaders across the land, unlocking quests as you go. The game's an assorted mix of those main story missions and a boatload of side content, from arena battles to car races to getting involved in all the various sundries of the people who live in the major cities as you do their dirty work, from investigating new satellites falling from space to exploring mutant-filled tunnels to patrolling the wasteland and the various vehicles you can buy, win, or steal. And yes, patrolling in this game basically means going to lands strange and locations unique and then slaughtering the ever-living shit out of anyone in those spaces, because other than a couple towns dotting the world like teenager acne on a face that was set on fire and put out with an ice pick, here, for the most part, everybody's evil. Good guys are holed up in major cities, everyone else out and about living rough off the land until you basically show up and murder talk them. And that's when the game is an absolute blast. Like Doom, when the game is hot and heavy and it's about slipping and sliding quickly in and out of slaughter spots or sneaking up behind some crazy half-cadaver looking scavenger who looks like they climbed into the old junk piles after rubbing themselves down with horse glue. That is the great parts. It's about leaping over enemies like pneumatic leg jackrabbits armed to the teeth. And let's be frank here, you're living in a world so badass most people should be carrying tombstones on their back for easy placement when they die. Everyone is packing 9 kinds of heat here, and everybody's fighting. The death toll's incredibly high, and the action matches it at almost every turn, regardless of which of the various gangs or groups you're fighting. You can sometimes find them battling out in old abandoned buildings or preying on one another in vehicle packs. You can step in or not, depending on what you want to do. And it is profoundly noticeable that the movement is just the slickest I think I've seen since Doom 2016, once you upgrade some of the skills in particular. If the Rage name had been taken, they could have just called it Move 2, and I would have actually been fine with that. This is also aided by the continual movement and animations of the enemies as they jump around, they juke, and they have different patterns that made many gamers, I think, sit back during the first game and rethink how they played. That is actually mimicked here. However, when it comes to the driving, it is a bit more of an acquired taste compared to the past game and what I was expecting. The game really does show Avalanche's roots. As you guys know, I'm a huge fan of Mad Max and its car combat overall. And the game takes no prisoners in the comparison department as convoys rage across the land like post-apocalyptic Fast and Furious movies. Each one is a mini episode on its own as you try to take down the guards with unique weapons and devices so that you can whittle away at the main convoy lead to get the various upgrades inside. Even the way the world is built, the way the cars handle, the way the guns work on the cars, returning newfound cars to the bases to keep them, it's all very reminiscent of Mad Max, except slower. And sometimes noticeably slower. Even with turbo on most vehicles, other than a couple race-style cars, don't expect the hot and heavy speeds that Mad Max was known for, even with the souped-up main vehicle. And when you get in the tank in the game, just be prepared, because I've seen lunar eclipses go faster than this thing when it takes a corner. There's just a weight here that I noticed. The furious feeling of Mad Max's combat is here, but the sensation of speed and never knowing when a corner might send you sailing off to a short drop and a sudden stop didn't come up as often, though it did occasionally appear. It fits Rage's world better, I think, and the various upgrades for your car can help, but I would have liked to feed just a bit more speed to my ride, depending on the situation. Now, speaking of skills and upgrades, I actually laughed out loud a bit when I saw how many there are. You got upgrades for your upgrades as well. Buying an upgrade for a gun, for instance, not only adjusts 4 parameters for the gun, like damage and recoil, but also adds a series of fitted upgrades, one of which per level you can activate, meaning a level 5 gun isn't only a portable howitzer now, it's also got more bullets, let's say, or reloads quicker, or shatters enemies' armor much faster. Skills can also be purchased from the various physical attributes like stamina and health, but also you can upgrade the cybernetic skills you have by adding more uses, changing cooldown, and more importantly, adding combo abilities to some of the skills. This can make almost any weapon or cybernetic skill usable in some way with odd combinations depending not only on the weapon types you have, but what upgrades you've got and the synergy they offer together in reflection of your own combat style. And this is a godsend on harder difficulties, where not only is quick wit, a bit of luck, and an ace trigger finger required, but so is minimizing the time you're not throwing huge amounts of lead downwind like you're tossing a fucking fishing net off a dock. But none of this would matter if the difficulty and AI weren't up to snuff. As you guys know, I try to test all these. When it comes to difficulty, easy was just that. Normal and hard felt about right, with hard requiring a good deal of tactics to get through. Nightmarish, on the other hand, was just that. Many times with me dying as I was getting off the vehicles, even the lightest SWAT of most of the guns could kill you. Upgrades later can certainly help this. Sadly, the AI is not as helpful. It's about in line with Rage 1, which means it's not great, but helped again by the enemy movement and animations as the prior title was. There are times for sure when you're going to come around a corner, and it's like you ask 12 third graders what the square root of the color blue is, and everyone just freezes to see if it's some kind of verbal trick. Most of the time, they are passable, but I would never call the AI great at all. Instead, it uses what it has to the best of its ability, and in the later difficulty levels, that's just more orders of lethality. And of course, this brings us to the game's length. How does all this come together? If you actually just do the main missions plus 1 or 2 arcs to maybe get a couple of the weapons, as most of the good ones are in the arcs or the enemy strongholds, you're actually only looking at maybe 11 to 13 hours on normal or hard difficulty, depending on player skill. It sounds short for sure, but Rage continues on after the main story credits roll, and in fact, adjusts the world a little bit to reflect what's happened, and from that point on, you're basically Walker, Texas Rager in and around the world. If you were to 100% this, you're looking at probably 40 to 50 hours if you collect every vehicle, you find every item, you defeat every enemy, and you do every race. Side mission quality, especially those that aren't reliant on the main story, run from okay to good, but you have to really buy into the fiction, with you searching to find fallen rangers, fallen comrades, rescue friends, discover hidden secrets of the past, and cleansing the game world of the enemy as you do so. Throughout the entire game, I had 2 bugs, both involving ladders, where climbing them, I got stuck. The game allows for fast travel in almost all instances to one of the 3 major locations, so that did not stop progress. Lastly, there are micros in this. They use Rage coins, but it doesn't say how much they are right now. They are only skins for cars and guns, but they are there, and that's something to be aware of. And something else to be aware of is just how fun it is, and that brings us to fun factor. Rage 2 is a very unique game, I will give it that. As a fan of Mad Max, it's a mix of vehicular combat and more diverse world. That's absolutely appreciated. The world is stretched out, though, and the lack of the AI really coming after you on the roads replaces a bit of Mad Max's feeling of the hunter becoming the hunter into the not cared about becoming the feared, and that's an odd dichotomy. Also, the world, like I said, is bigger than the prior game, and the open world at times pays off, but unlike, say, Far Cry New Dawn, where it's slathered on some neon and hoped you wouldn't notice, none of it fit together, Rage 2 spreads itself a bit too thin instead, but what is there does fit. It's got long stretches where really not much is going on until a random group of enemies appears in front of you fighting, which are more concerned usually with each other than some speed demon careening in his death machine into their brothers and sisters. It's an odd mix, where Far Cry has always felt afraid of a moment's downtime, throwing anything it can at you at all times. Rage 2 actually does the opposite, and to a detriment there as well. But I'll tell you what, once you find a place and you end up starting to battle, a lot of those technical issues start to fall to the wayside. There is a lot of fun to be had here. There is an eclectic mix of that car driving around, those serene moments, unfortunately, sometimes a bit too serene, which shows you some of the technical limitations they've got going here. But at the same time, when you end up smashing into a convoy, that can also be a blast. And I have to say, the world's variability and the different locations, that really does help. It's not the typical desert, one's blue, one's white, one's gray, that we see in Mad Max. So that brings us to the review. I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating system, with rent being replaced by deep sale on PC titles, if that's the score. I would say on the PC, this is worthy of a purchase right now. There is some performance issues, absolutely, but I have to say the combat is phenomenal. It feels excellent. I like the weapons. There is a bevy of upgrades and multiple difficulties you can choose. If you mainline this thing, it's not the longest game, but if you want to continue to play on, you can do that, and the fiction slightly matches that, or do most of that content prior to going to the end. You can do either one. There are some weaknesses here. I hope to see some patches, but this was a blast to play. Despite any other issues I ended up having, and I did have some, there was never a time where I really sat back and said, I'm not enjoying myself, which I can't say for a lot of other games. And that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, maybe subscribe, maybe give it a thumbs up, give it a thumbs down if you didn't. You can follow me on Twitch or Twitter. On Twitch, I'm ACG on Twitch. You'll see new games streamed as well as podcasts we do every single week. And I have a Facebook. You can follow me there. All the links in the description. Or you can become a patron on the Patreon website. We have one of the coolest Discord communities there is. We put together private servers for games. There is a ton of stuff that goes on that Patreon. I would love for you to check it out. It also helps me continue to give you guys reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. And I buy a copy of every single game, even if a developer gives me a code. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.